Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for the awesome introduction as well. My name is Tane Hunter.
My name is Angus Harvey, and we are the co-founders of Future Crunch. And we're really stoked to be here today. So thank you very much, Avis and the rest of your team, for having us.
We live in an age of unprecedented progress. Science fiction is becoming reality. In the past few decades, we've seen incredible advancements in science and technology, but the next 10 years are going to knock your socks off. We believe that one of the most powerful tools that you can have for your future and for your career is an understanding of how quickly things are changing and what that means not only for business, but for society more generally. This crunching of converging technologies, it's happening now, and it will be ubiquitous and continuous. So we're now capable of harnessing some of the most powerful forces in the universe. And as all good geeks know, with great power comes great responsibility. It's crucial that we not only understand the transformative power of technology, but also the associated risks. And once we understand these, we can act more wisely, both as a society and in our own lives. Now, that's why Gus and I started Future Crunch. It was to educate, to create a debate about the world we're all going to be living in. It's about evaluating consequences of converging technologies that are all crunching together, and really what that means for all of our lives. Now, we believe, and we're really excited about rapid technological growth and scientific innovation, and believe that it could create a world that is better for all of us. We believe the future is going to be more peaceful, more transparent, and more abundant. But even if some of you disagree, perhaps you think these changes are having negative consequences. Well, then as Sun Tzu said, know thy enemy. Regardless of what side of the issue you're on, we believe that the role of science and technology needs to have a place in public debate.
Unfortunately, right now, that debate is pretty much non-existent. As a result of policies from both the Labour and the coalition governments over the last 3 years, the CSIRO, which is Australia's National Science Research Institute, and one of the great national science research institutes in the world, has had to lay off more than 800 jobs, including the job of a prize contender for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And by June this year, they're going to have to lay off another 400 jobs. Australia, by some accounts, the richest country in the world, now ranks 18th out of the top 20 advanced economies in terms of the amount of money that it spends on research and development as a proportion of GDP. So that puts it only just ahead of the Slovak Republic, and Greece, which we don't need to add, is currently broke at the moment. To us, that just seems crazy. Look around you. We live in a society whose prosperity is based on science and technology. And what we need is a regulatory environment that reflects that, that's primed for the next 10 years of innovation, and not one that's designed to maintain the last 100 years. But we're not getting that from our politicians and policymakers. So it's up to all of us to understand, to talk about these things, because these are truly transformative times.
So we're going to take you on a little tour through some of the more amazing things happening on the frontier of science and technology. Now, we don't want to stand up here and blow smoke up your ass and tell you that everything's going to be fantastic. What we do want to do, though, is make sure that the debate about the world that we're all going to be living in is clear, critical, and intelligent. We want to equip you with some knowledge about the world that you'll be graduating into, and the world that's quite different than when Gus and I graduated only a few years ago. The world in which we work and play is fundamentally changing, and it's underpinned by these scientific and technological revolutions that are happening everywhere.
Before we get into that, though, we have a little announcement to make, which is that Santa Claus isn't real. Now, I'm so sorry. Now, hopefully most of you knew that Santa Claus wasn't real, but once upon a time, you may not have known that. You may have thought that a strange man dressed in a suit designed by Coca-Cola, flew around the world once a year on a 19th century horse sled pulled through the air magically by some weird indigenous fauna from Norway.
I did.
And so did I. And at a certain point, though, you kind of start looking at Santa Claus and you go, how does he actually fit down the chimney?
And suddenly something clicks, and the way in which you see the world is transformed. Learning how to see in a new light, changing your perspective, and learning how to identify new opportunities is essential. And once you understand the way the world truly is, not the way the government, and in particular the media, tell you it is, and once you understand the true transformative power of technology, then you really break free from the chains that have been wrapped around you all your life. Now, Gus and I love nerding out about science and technology. I'm a biology nerd, and I've had a love affair with biology for as long as I can remember. Right now, I'm in cancer research at Peter MacCullen Cancer Centre in Melbourne, Australia's largest centre. And I'm looking at cancer biomarkers, which are molecular signals which will help us understand, treat, and diagnose those affected with cancer.
I'm a social scientist, and my background was in environmental economics. That's the subject that I did my PhD in. But more recently, I've moved out of academia, and I'm now the Australian manager for an organisation called Random Hacks of Kindness. Has anyone heard of that organisation? Great, there's a few. Random Hacks of Kindness, what we do is we connect volunteer technologists, people who can code or who know how to build websites, and then we put them together with charities and community groups that have a social impact. And then we put those two groups together and we see if we can watch the magic happen to create open source solutions that solve some of our biggest social problems. So Tane and I aren't exactly natural collaborators. He's a real scientist, I'm a social scientist. And those two groups don't usually play so nicely in the sandpit together. Plus, it's very difficult to take someone seriously when their idea of a pickup line is, oh, hey baby, I wish I was the hand of DNA so I could unzip your jeans.
As far as I'm concerned, an economist is someone who's going to tell you tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen today. But what we do have in common, though, is a shared love and respect for science, technology, and rationality. We're not only positivists, we are positive. We're really excited rather than frightened by the future.
To show you what we mean by this, let's start by asking you a very simple question. And that question is, if you had to give our species a score out of 10, what would that score be? 1 being, we're all doomed, this is just an absolute disaster, and 10 being, we're excelling in every single area that we possibly could. And in fact, what we'd like to ask you to do is put up your hands with the score that you think best represents that. So everyone put up your hands now and maybe give us a bit of an idea. And don't worry, this is not a trick. Just have a go, whatever it might be. All right.
And keep them up. I'm going to be a bit of like a photo monkey here and take a photo. We're not trying to catch you out here. We're just trying to get a cool photo for our Twitter feed. Awesome. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, your answer to this really depends on where you're getting your information from. If you're getting it from the place that most people are getting it from, the mainstream news, then your answer might look like this. The top 10 stories on CNN last year, the most popular stories. Number 1 was, of course, the terrifying Ebola epidemic.
The missing airline flight, MH370, comes second.
Then, of course, there's the terrorist scourge of ISIS.
The Ferguson shootings in the United States.
The Ukraine invasion of Ukraine by Russian proxy forces.
Celebrity deaths, such as that of Robin Williams.
Who could forget the Ice Bucket Challenge?
Another Malaysian airline flight, MH17.
Then there was the Israeli invasion of Gaza.
And Boko Haram.
And then an 11th story just thrown in for good measure, which was a terrifying combination of both Ebola and ISIS. So it doesn't look really good. In fact, this is kind of like the apocalypse, basically. It's really, really scary. And yet, by almost any measure you care to use, for the average person on planet Earth today, the world is a better place than it has been at any point in human history.
Over the last 2 centuries, life expectancy has more than doubled to over 70 years globally. And in countries like Australia and the US, it's now over 80 years. We're close to eradicating the world's second ever global disease after smallpox, the guinea worm. The World Health Organization now views this disease essentially wiped off the face of the planet. 2013 marked our tipping point against AIDS, our fight against AIDS, at which point more people received antiretroviral medication than were being infected by AIDS. So we're going to see a continued reduction in the amount of people who are infected by AIDS. This really is the beginning of the end in our fight against this devastating disease. We're also winning on malaria. So from 2000 to 2012, we reduced the global infection rate by 25%, and we reduced the mortality rate by almost half.
As a result of treating these kinds of preventable diseases, more children are living to see their 5th birthday today than at any point in our history. In fact, 2014 marked the 42nd year in a row that the global child mortality rate came down. That means that fewer parents, as a proportion of the population, had to bury their children last year than at any point in history. The Economist estimates that between 2001 and 2013, as a result of treating these diseases, we've saved the lives of 13.6 million children. That is more people than have been killed by all forms of war and violence in the same period. Where do you hear that story in the media? And we're doing quite well in poverty as well. In the 19th century, 80% of the planet lived in extreme poverty. By 1980, that number was down to half, and that number's more than halved again in recent years. Between 1990 and 2010, the total number of people in the world increased from 5.5 billion people to 7 billion people. And yet the total number of people living in poverty decreased from 1.9 billion people to 1.2 billion people. That, as far as we're concerned, is the greatest news story of our time. And yet where do you hear it in the media? We're also becoming better educated and more literate. In 1970, around 50% of the planet attended some form of formal education. That number today is more than 80%. And more women are being educated as well. Literacy is also up. More than 4/5 of the world now are literate. And most of the people who are illiterate are part of the older generation. So we're moving to a world where every single person can read and write. All forms of war and violence are coming down as well. This graph over here, for us, is one of the most astonishing things we've seen in recent years. It measures the total amount of war deaths from all forms of war around the planet. And that goes all the way back to World War II. And what you can see over here is that it's on a steady decline downwards. Now, the hippies sang in the 1960s about peace in our time. Well, according to this, we're closer to achieving that than we have been at any point in our history. And yet, where do you hear that story? And we're also being a lot nicer to each other. I often have to remind myself that in 1983, the year that I was born, racism was still legally mandated by the government of the country of my birth, South Africa. Aboriginal land rights still weren't recognised here in the state of New South Wales. Homosexuality was illegal in our home state of Victoria. And in some parts of the world, like Liechtenstein and Namibia, and even certain parts of Switzerland, women still weren't allowed the vote. We have made huge strides forward as a more compassionate and more caring species in my own lifetime.
So, why is it that we have such a negative view of a world that by almost all accounts is improving? The answer lies in our biology. So inside my brain, inside all of your brains, is a series of connections and synapses that are hardwired for threat detection. They center around an area known as the amygdala. It's old evolutionary programming. And while it's old, it's incredibly powerful. When you see something that's scary or dangerous, it overrides all other higher functioning parts of the brain. Another term for this is the car crash effect, our tendency to stare, gawk, and discuss things that are potentially scary or dangerous. Now, when you're looking out for tigers in bushes, this is pretty useful. Being able to identify threats will allow you to pass on your genes. However, in today's world, it's simply not as necessary. Things aren't as dangerous. Chances of mortality through things like violence and injury compared to our ancestors are something like 1,000 times less. The chance of getting attacked by a wild animal is so small as to be effectively zero. Now, I'm sure many of you know that you're 150 times more likely to die from a coconut falling on your head as you cower on the beach hiding from a shark than you are actually to get killed by one. But what you might not know is if Gus and I don't screw this presentation up, and we pop a bottle of bubbly later tonight, we're 1,000 times more likely to get injured by a champagne cork than by a shark. Unfortunately, though, the media knows this. They know fear is captivating and that we're primed for negative stimuli, and they use it to sell us stuff. So media studies show that bad news outweighs good by a factor of 20 to 1. We all know that sex sells. That's why Gus and I launched this nude fireman calendar. It's not exactly flying off the shelves like we hoped. So sex sells, but so does bad news. And we're being fed a steady diet of bad news to up ratings, and it's really distorting our view of the way the world truly is. Now, this distortion is further confounded by what's known as negativity bias, which is the psychological phenomenon by which we have a much greater recall of negative emotions over that of positive ones. We're simply hardwired to react to the dramatic and negative, and when we do, it has a much longer lasting effect. That's why we're all so familiar with CNN's top 10 stories. What makes things even worse is that in the last 20 years, media has gone truly global. So we're not only getting bad news from our neighborhoods, our cities, but from all over the world. And this, coupled with social media, means that we're getting bad news all the time from every corner of the globe, and it's really distorting our view of the way the world truly is.
Now, we should really be clear at this point. We're not standing in front of you and telling you that the world is a perfect place. There are still major problems. It's terrible that hundreds of millions of people around the world still go hungry. That's unacceptable. We still have huge levels of poverty around the world, which are unnecessary. We're increasing our prosperity and living standards are rising. But unfortunately, that's come largely at the expense of our environment, and we're seeing incredible ecological damage. And the proceeds of this world, the way that we're splitting things up, are unfair as well. And so we're moving into a world that's more unequal. And of course, homophobia, sexism, and racism aren't just things that are going to go away on their own. Those are fights that we need to continue to have. However, it's also easy to be cynical about the world the whole time and say nothing's ever getting better. And what we've shown you is that the empirical evidence flatly contradicts that view. Our successes in the past should really give us all the confidence as a species to move forward into the future and solve the new problems of the 21st century.
So, what kind of world are we moving into? It's certainly one that's more extreme. As a result of science and technology, things are changing at an increasing and incredible rate. The disruption and the magnitude of change is just profound. Now, management professors love this type of thing. They call it disruptive innovation. It's the idea that successive waves of innovation come along and wipe out entire industries. If you're writing for the Harvard Business Review, they just can't get enough of this stuff.
Unfortunately, though, that's not quite right. It's not really the way that technological disruption works. New forms of technology don't just come along and just wash away everything that's come before. Instead, new forms of technology come along and they get stacked on top of everything else that's come before. And at any given point, you can still access all the old technologies. So a more appropriate metaphor might be a cross-section through sedimentary rock. And it means that the technological landscape, the way that things are changing, is kind of really complex, multifaceted, and three-dimensional. And it means that it's quite difficult to actually figure out what's going on a lot of the time. It means that technological progress is unevenly distributed. So we've got these strange situations, for example, where we're using a 21st century technology like the mobile phone while driving around in our cars, which are powered by the internal combustion engine, which was a technology from the 1860s. And it's not just that technological progress across industries is uneven, it's also that access to technology is uneven. So the washing machine, which was a huge technological revolution because it allowed people to remove themselves from the drudgery of household work, still isn't available to 5 billion people around the world, even though it's been with us for more than 70 years as an invention. In other words, the way this stuff all plays out is kind of messy and complicated. And it's this complex, multidimensional landscape that leads us to a world that's really fundamentally layered in the future. It's the interplay of complex systems, of social systems, of economics, human geography, history, and politics that really determines how each layer comes on and fits onto everything that's come before. Remember, mountains rise and fall. That complexity for us is deeply humbling, but it's also incredibly exciting.
However, if we zoom out over the long term, technology grows exponentially. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts off small and slow, but quickly gains in size and speed, and sometimes triggers an avalanche. Now, this is crucial because our brains are wired to think in a local and linear way. Let me give you an example of this. If I take 30 linear steps, each a meter, I end up 30 meters away. If I take 30 exponential steps, with each doubling in distance, in 30 meters, in 30 steps, I end up 1 billion meters away. Or I've orbited the Earth 26 times. Now, this is how most science and technology grows. And it's easy to underestimate exponentials, and we often do. So our ancestors evolved in a world that was local and linear. Life was local, so most things in our forebears' lives were within a day or two's walking distance. Calculating where a tiger's going to pounce is a linear function. So we're left with these evolutionary hangovers that leave us ill-equipped to deal with the magnitude, the speed and scale at which things are changing. This leads to a perception gap. It means that in the short term, we overestimate technology, and in the long term, we greatly underestimate technology. This is known as Amara's Law, and it happens from everything from medicine to mobile phones.
So the other thing to say at this point is that it's often easy to miss this kind of stuff because we've been so overwhelmed by the amount of information that's hitting us on a daily basis that you can easily not be aware of what's on the horizon. You've all heard of the knowledge economy. Well, the knowledge economy is over. An astronomer, for example, used to have an advantage because he or she could tell you about the nighttime sky. They had more knowledge. But today, you can download an app that gives you more knowledge than any astronomer could possibly know on their own about the night sky. What matters in today's economy is whether you can convince someone to use or to direct their attention to your app or your platform or your particular knowledge set. This really is the attention economy.
So take Kim Kardashian. Many people think she has a fantastic ass. There are many asses out there, and I would argue that some are much better. But regardless of what you think of her, in this new economy, she's a genius. Her ass gets more attention than most of the world's biggest political elections, and she makes millions of dollars just by gaining our attention.
The other thing to remember is that every time you direct your attention to a link or a platform or an app or you go to an event, you're creating an information trail. And that information trail is really valuable, which is why governments are trying to pass laws to give them control over our information. And one of the big challenges for us as citizens over the next 10 years is going to be to wrestle control of that information back. And as we've already seen, that's going to be a really difficult battle.
In this new economy, those who can get your attention win. So what does that mean for you? Well, if you can learn to focus and create a really good bullshit filter to discern the signal from the noise, then while everyone else is looking at Kim Kardashian's ass, you can be tapping in to a high-quality, unprecedented stream of knowledge from everything from privacy to astronomy. So pay attention. We're about to tell you about some of the more exciting things happening on the fringe of science and technology that you just don't get from popular media.
So, the first story that we need to tell you about is that for the first time ever, technology is selling to everyone on Earth. Now, that wasn't always the case. Technology used to be something that only sold to companies, and more recently to the sort of middle and upper classes. But in the last few years, technology has become available to everyone on the planet thanks to the mobile phone revolution. This is a picture of someone in Aleppo in Syria. This is a picture of a guard on the North Korean and Chinese border, and this is a picture of some Tanzanian porters halfway up Mount Kilimanjaro. And as you can see, what they're all doing is holding their mobile phones. As a result, we're now in a world where 3 billion people are online, and 2 billion of those people are connecting to the internet via their smartphones. By 2020, we're going to be in a world where 4 billion people, more than 80% of all the adults on Earth, are online, and every single one of those people is going to be connecting to the internet via their smartphones. 2 fundamental technology laws underpin this revolution. The first, many of you will have already heard of. It's called Moore's Law, and it states that the number of transistors that it's possible to put on a computer chip doubles roughly once every 18 months, or in other words, computer processing power doubles roughly once every year and a half. It means that the new iPhone 6 has 625 times more transistors than my first ever computer, a 1995 Pentium. You're literally carrying around a 1995 supercomputer in your pocket. And it's not just, and the price of these things is coming down incredibly quickly as well. This is the Form P9 smartphone from India, and it has a host of features that the original iPhone didn't have at all, and it costs less than $30. The second technology law that's underpinning this revolution is less well known. It's called Cooper's Law, and it states that the data or voice conversations that you can have over a given area of radio bandwidth doubles roughly once every 30 months. This in some ways is even more remarkable than Moore's Law because it's held true since the first ever radio transmission by Marconi back in 1895. The effectiveness of data and voice conversations has improved by over 1 trillion times since then. As a result, we're moving into a world where we're going to see 2 to 3 times more smartphones than computers by 2020, and all of those smartphones are going to be as powerful and more powerful than the current iPhone 6. And remember, these aren't just supercomputers. They've got a host of arrays and sensors that allow you to track how you're moving, know where you are, and it means that you can conduct mobile payments. So we're looking at a world of 10 times the opportunity. If you think things are changing now, wait till 2020. This means we're moving to an entirely new type of world. We're looking at a world where 1 to 2 billion extra people who've never been online before are going to come online onto the internet, and they're going to have the networking power of the internet at their fingertips. And remember, they're all going to be literate, so it means they can read all the information that's out there. And they're going to be using totally new technologies. So things like cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which has the blockchain technology underlying it, those are going to be new ways of exchanging value. It means that someone in Africa can exchange value with someone from China without ever having to worry about an intermediary like a bank in order to transfer that money or value around. Now, many people will tell you that the problem with these kinds of new technologies like Bitcoin and blockchain more generally is that they're kind of clunky and slow. They're a bit inefficient, they're totally not user-friendly, they're not very secure, and we're not really sure how to explain them to our grandmothers, so how do you actually use them? But remember, that's what the internet was like back when we started using it in the early 90s. This is what the internet used to look like. And it was really clunky, it was horribly designed, it was super slow, and you definitely would never have put your credit card details onto it. And what happened is that with each of those problems, a company came along and solved that problem. So, Google solved the problem of how you search for stuff on the internet. PayPal solved the problem of how you conduct transactions easily. Amazon came along and solved the problem of retail. And AOL solved the problem of accessibility. And what's going to happen with blockchain is that a company is going to come along and it's going to solve each of the problems with blockchain, and those companies are going to be the industries of the future. So if you're thinking about where to go with your career, you might want to start thinking about that.
At the same time, everyone's getting connected. We're seeing transformative change in the way we make things, too. So we're seeing a flattening of the manufacturing process, away from big companies and into the hands of small business and individuals. 3D printing is leading the charge, and at the commercial level, it's already a transformative technology. They're using it in the aerospace industry to create specialized parts for engines to get us into space. They're using it, it was a key technology to create the world's fastest car, the 1-1. They're even printing the classics, such as the Shelby Cobra. Now, 3D printing is being used in totally new ways as well, and this is unleashing new forms of creativity. In the medical industry, they're using it to create models of body parts to practice surgery on, they're printing more efficient drugs, and they're using it to create organs by printing scaffolding, which you grow new organs from stem cells. Now, they've come out with 3D printed casts. I've had casts, and the itching is absolutely insane. But what they've done recently is added ultrasound, which also allows the bones to heal up to 40% faster. Now, Japanese scientists are very close to printing full organs. They're using bioprinting and a combination of stem cells, proteins, and other synthetic compounds pretty similar to collagen. 3D printing, a company in China called Winsun Technologies just printed this mansion from scratch with inside and exterior decor, and they used only recycled materials. Now, 3D printing is improving and changing all the time. This 3D printer was configured to print electrical circuits. In space, NASA over the past 5 months has printed 21 objects in zero gravity. So this is going to be a way that we can continue our exploration of the final frontier. Now, recently, a company in the US called Carbon 3D created a totally new way of 3D printing. It's a way of printing things from pools of plastic and metal that literally rise up as a whole. Now, this has increased the process by up to 100 times. Now, 3D printing is now at speeds of traditional manufacturing, and this is a complete game changer.
If you want to see why people get really excited about this, think about the way that current consumer products are made. The raw materials for that consumer product are shipped from every corner of the globe to a place, say for example in China, and then they're assembled by specialized workers using specialized technologies at every single stage of that process. And then the final product is packaged, put together, and then shipped to you all the way over here in Australia, where it goes through a number of intermediaries who all take their little piece of value, and then it's finally delivered to you through a retailer. 3D printing has the potential to strip out every single node in that supply chain. Think about the kind of disruption that creates. That means no more sweatshops, for example, like this one in Bangladesh that collapsed last year. What does that mean for the global container ship industry and its accompanying carbon emissions? And one of our favorites, no more wasteful manufacturing processes, because with 3D printing, you only use the materials that you need, and any materials you don't need, you just reincorporate into the next run. That's the beauty of an additive model over a subtractive one. Of course, it raises a whole raft of new issues around digital piracy, copyright, sharing, and new forms of supply chains for raw materials. Those are the battles of the 21st century. Those are the battles that we're all going to be fighting.
Let's talk about something we're particularly passionate about, renewables. Not much good news here in Australia, I'm afraid. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. But globally, it's a completely different story. Things are just getting started, and it's being led mainly by solar. And solar is the new sexy.
The thing about solar is that it's actually already into the third generation of solar cells, which allow you to bend solar cells onto uneven surfaces, and it means you can stack them into layers, which increases their efficiency from current levels of 15% to about 30%. And at the cutting edge of technology, we're already into technologies that allow you to paint solar onto the roof and install solar into clear glass windows. Now, if you want to think about this for disruption, think about how much clear glass window there is in Sydney, how many acres of clear glass there are in the buildings, how many windshields there are of cars that are driving around. And then imagine that every single one of those is a solar panel cell generating electricity. That means that we're moving into a world where electricity is going to be abundant, cheap, and clean. Now, solar, like many of the other technologies we've talked about here today, is an exponential technology. It obeys its own exponential technology law called the Swanson effect. And that states that for every doubling of global solar capacity, the costs come down by about 20%. And that's held true for the last 40 years. Pessimists will tell you that this stuff doesn't really matter, that solar and renewables only account for about 1% of total power generation in the world, so we're not going to really see any changes anytime soon. That, however, is a classic case of local and linear thinking. And to show you what we mean by this, take a look at these projections from the International Energy Agency over the last few years. What you can see over here is that every year as they release their predictions for how much wind and solar there's going to be in the world, they have to revise their projections upwards because this technology is changing exponentially. So back in 2006 over here, you'll see that they predicted that it was going to take until the 2020s to get to where we are today already with wind, and it was going to take until the 2030s to get to where we are today with solar. Their current prediction is that solar is going to be the dominant form of energy production on the planet by 2050. How many times are they going to revise that estimate downwards in the next decade? If you want to see what this disruption looks like, then the newspaper industry is a great example. Like the fossil fuels industry, it's been around since the 19th century. And it's experienced record growth and profits in the last few years. And what's really interesting is that the internet, the technology that kills it, is invented back there in the 80s. But the executives see no reason to change what is very obviously a successful business model. By the 2000s, some of them are going, whoa, what's going on? And then in 2006, that sector just goes into free fall. What's really interesting as well is that Twitter is invented back there in 2006. And it, along with other social media technologies, means that people aren't reliant on newspapers for their information anymore. And this is changing quick as well. In 2011, 10% of US adults said they relied on the internet as their main source of information. Today, 30% of US adults say they rely on Facebook alone as their main source of information. Now, the fossil fuel industry is currently in the same place that the newspaper industry was in about 10 years ago. Some of the more enlightened executives know they need to change. You might have seen the announcement by AGL yesterday. But most of them are like rabbits caught in headlights. They've been doing this their whole lives. They don't know how to change. And they're about to get run over. And that is great news, because it's high time we stopped using 19th century technology involving digging black rocks and dinosaur juice out of the ground and burning it in order to power the 21st century.
Gus and I like to finish things off by getting personal. So let's talk about what matters most, how we take care of our bodies. Back in 1991, around the time where some of the audience members may have been being born, the US embarked on one of the most expensive and ambitious projects ever undertaken, to map the human genome. Now, today in my job, I crunch human genetic data every day, and genomics is pretty commonplace throughout biology. So the current project that's of the same sort of magnitude is reverse engineering the human brain, the organ that truly sets us apart and makes us unique in this world of life. So countries led by Europe and the US are investing billions of dollars in trying to figure out how our brains work. They're using supercomputers to map every synapse and connection and to put it into digital format. Now, if they pull this off, it'll have profound implications on our understanding of neurological disease, treatment of those diseases. It'll allow us to slow brain aging, computer-brain interfacing, and it will spill into areas such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. So moving from the brain to the body, in the future, you'll be monitored 24 hours a day by a multitude of arrays and sensors. They're not just going to be around your wrist, Fitbits in your clothing, or in your glasses. They're going to be really tiny and underneath your skin and inside your bloodstream. They're going to be monitoring a whole bunch of biomarkers, molecular signs, and signals of your health. Nanotechnology is going to be your friend, and it will underpin most of these technologies. So nanotechnology is the ability to manipulate matter at the atomic level with super precision. So it happens between 1 and 100 nanometers. What's that mean? To put this into perspective, 1 nanometer next to a meter stick is the same as a blueberry next to the Earth. So we're making stuff at a ridiculously small scale, and it's already here. So the fantastic notion of a team of scientists and doctors shrunk down so small that they can course through your veins and cure all your ailments is popular science fiction trope from the 1950s. Yet, we are almost there. Researchers at the Institute of Science in Bangalore have created artificial nanostructures that can swim through undiluted human blood. They've created micromotors, which run on your stomach acid and harmlessly decompose. Soon, nanobots in your digestive tract and in your bloodstream will be able to intelligently scout out pathogens and early signs of disease, such as Alzheimer's and cancer. And awesomely, they're going to be able to deliver drugs in very specific ways. They can scour your veins for calcification and plaque buildup, get rid of all those nasty free radicals and pathogens. Now, all of this information is going to be sent continuously and wirelessly to medical servers. They're going to know you're having a heart attack before you do. When you're showing signs of a heart attack, you'll get a message notifying you and your family, and a drone is going to be dispatched with a defibrillator to keep you alive until the ambulance arrives. Now, at the hospital, they'll be able to grow you new organs for replacement, such as a heart for transplant. Can you imagine what personal organ growth is going to do to the organ enlargement industry? So for less urgent cases, an appointment's going to be automatically scheduled with your doctor, who might not even be a human anymore. Now, they can give you advice on what supplements you should take, what nutrition, and what medication based on your specific genome. For really run-of-the-mill type things like a flu or infection, you will be prescribed a digital medication that you can print at home on your 3D printer. Sound pretty crazy, right? Well, the Chemputer has already been developed at the University of Glasgow, and they're scaling it up for use at home. So healthcare is growing exponentially, and that means so does life expectancy. And we're already seeing that. So a girl born today in Australia is expected to live for 84.6 years, and a boy for 80.5. This almost certainly underestimates what's going to happen in the future. So a girl born today with a few more medical advancements will easily have her outlive this century. Now, this blows my mind every time I think about it. But on current linear trends today, for every day that you live, you gain 6 hours extra of life expectancy. So during this presentation, on average, all of us gain 10 extra minutes of life.
All right, so let's wrap things up. We came here today with a purpose. We wanted to have a conversation with you about the world that we're all going to be living in, the world that you're all going to be graduating into. And right now, that conversation is dominated by people who want to push bad news at you because it ups ratings or gets more eyes on their newspapers, or who are interested in technology because they want to sell it to you.
What we hope we've managed to convince you of is the world is a much better place than you're being told it is, that things are changing much faster than you think, and that you're even evolutionarily equipped to deal with. But knowledge is power, and this world is full of huge opportunities. The days of having the same full-time mundane job until retirement are over. Entrepreneurs and startups are growing exponentially, and so are their success rates. Some of the biggest companies in the world are gearing up for a future that in 30 years, 80% of the jobs that will exist you haven't even heard of. So keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We didn't even get to talk about cool stuff like virtual reality.
And there's the Internet of Things,
drone technology,
data-driven agriculture,
crazy quantum computing.
There's brain-machine interfacing,
driverless cars, which are coming soon.
And of course, the space industry.
And a whole host of other areas that have the potential to completely transform the world in which we live, work, and play. This is the crunch, and it's happening now.
Once you learn to leave behind your local and linear thinking, once you remove the blinds that have been placed on you by popular media and culture, you set yourself free. Things are changing far faster than our politicians and regulators can keep up with. And that challenges our current mindsets and structures. It's up to all of us, to all of you, to think about, to talk about these things, because these are truly transformative times. And there are huge risks involved, but there are also massive opportunities.
So our challenge to you: first, try and be aware of your local and linear thinking. Try and think in terms of exponential change. Be aware of your perception gap and Amara's law, and start to realize that crazy technology that sounds so out there today will be commonplace in the future. Unhinge your mind to a whole new raft of possibilities.
Secondly, try and be aware of the negativity bias that you have and the car crash effect. And stop relying on popular media for your information. They have a commercial logic that's predicated on fear and inaccurate perceptions of risk, and they're distorting our view of the world. And please, stop sharing bad news on social media. You're just making it worse for the rest of us.
On the upside, you can be a conduit for positivity. Not only are you going to be way more popular at dinner parties, most importantly, you have the facts on your side. So next time someone tells you we're all doomed, you can tell them, by almost all accounts, 2014 was the best year in human history.
And finally, look at today's problems as opportunities. Understand that the people that solve the issues with today's clunky and inefficient technologies are going to be the giants and the success stories of the future. Yes, there are big risks involved in all of this, but as one of the great engineers of the 20th century once said, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. If you want to change things, if we want to build a better world, then we build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
So thanks for paying attention.
And thank you very much for having us. Quick note, we are Future Crunch. You can find us on Facebook, just type in Future Crunch. You can find us on Twitter. You can find our website by typing in Future Crunch. And would love to carry on talking to the rest of you in person and online.
Cool.